Yes, please. Come right up here to the podium.
Well, it's brief. Actually, I did Joseph's slide before, and it was I was threatened quite a bit as a consequence because the slides I showed were pictures of a city where they had built bike paths along the creek, and not only did they build the bike paths along the creek, which were concrete, but the creek was concrete also, and there was a lot of opposition to that, which I understand. I just want to mention that we could do the bike paths without making the creeks concrete, still have the concrete bike paths, and it would really be a great thing. Biking is very dangerous in Santa Barbara, but it would be nice to have that. It's a very great sensation to be able to ride along a creek on the bikes, and Arroyo Burro would be a great place for that actually to occur.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then, should we can wait? Okay, Mr. Frickman will wait until the related item comes up. Thank you. Committee members, staff communications.
No.
All right. On to the business items. First, we have education and outreach update from Liz Smith.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I'm Liz Smith, the Creeks Outreach Coordinator, and I'm here to give you an update on our education and outreach efforts. Kind of. Okay. Okay, so jumping right in, we have a pretty comprehensive education and outreach program, which includes youth watershed education, community events, media and internet outreach, project and program outreach, and community-based social marketing. Our youth watershed education is mainly provided by Explore Ecology, which is a program of art from scrap. It is a free program offered to schools in the city, and the county also has a similar program with Explore Ecology, so the same message is reaching a lot of students in the city and the county. This past year, we reached over 3,000 students, and that includes in-class presentations and field trips to the Watershed Resource Center and field trips to our local creeks. We also partner with the Parks and Recreation Department's Nature Camp, and that is 4 sessions over the summer, and we will go and take the kids out to a local creek. This past summer we did native planting at Mission Creek at Oak Park. We also partner with Marito, which is Multicultural Education for Resource Issues Threatening Oceans. Excuse me, that's a program of NOAA, and they provide classes to students in Ventura and Santa Barbara, and I think also San Luis Obispo. And when they come into the city of Santa Barbara, we work with them to reach a couple classes a year, and this bottom photo is in March of this year. We went down to Mission Creek Lagoon. Our community events, obviously our largest event is our Creek Week. This year was our 15th annual event, and it was a little bit smaller this year with only 19 events, but we still had good turnout with over 1,300 participants. A few highlights, the Creeks Division hosted our second tour on the Land Shark, and so we had it sell out pretty quickly, 44 seats, and we went to several locations around town, project locations, and then went out into the ocean to talk about the Mission Creek Lagoon restoration. The upper left and bottom right photo are a beach cleanup that we did with employees from Horny Toad Clothing, Channel Islands Outfitters, and the Santa Barbara Zoo, where they collected 95 pounds. And I'll just note that this was less than a week after Coastal Cleanup Day, where this same beach had been cleaned. So it was a bummer that they picked up 3,000 cigarette butts at that beach on Saturday, and the following Friday they picked up another 800. So that was unfortunate. The bottom 2 photos here, for the first time we hosted trivia night at the brew house, and they made us our first official Creek Week beer. And we had some great prizes donated from Explore Ecology, Channel Keeper, and EDC. So that was a fun event, and we hope to do that one again. It was called the Creek Week Elderberry Wheat. This is our new Creek Week website, which we just put together right before this year's event. Previously, it was just kind of built into the city's website structure, and we couldn't customize it very much. So we finally got a standalone site set up. So just wanted to show you guys that in case you hadn't seen it yet. And other community events that we participate in include the Earth Day Festival. You see a couple familiar faces up there. This year we did a social media photo booth where we had people hold up a sign with a pledge and then post it to their own social media sites to help spread the message and take sustainable actions. We also participate in the Harbor and Seafood Festival, Looking Good Santa Barbara, and this year for the first time we tabled at the Trails and Tales event at the Botanic Garden, which is a dog event just to promote that the garden is dog friendly all the time. But we were there talking about pet waste and the importance of picking it up, and we gave away a lot of doggy bags. So that was a fun one. And I wanted to share with you some of the outreach materials that we give out at these events. And almost all of our outreach materials are available in English and Spanish. And I brought a few for you if you'd like to pass those around. We have our Ocean Begins on Your Street brochure, which we've had for, I think, at least 10 years. And we update it every few years as needed. And it has a lot of tips for around the home and resources for local contacts and water quality information. We have our Simple Tips rack card, and those are just quick little things that people can grab at events. We have our youth activity books, I guess, coloring books. And at every event, we take our large watershed aerial photo, and we would frequently have people asking where they could get that imagery. So we had posters printed up, and we'll give those away at events as well. And then we have some goodies like doggy bag dispensers, tattoos, stickers, magnets, pencils. So I just wanted to share those with you. I work with our enforcement staff when they find kind of common problems out in the community, like with parking lots, washing of parking lots and trash enclosures, or home improvement projects, people dumping paint or concrete or any number of things into the gutter and storm drain. We can work together to develop these outreach materials that they can then keep in the truck so that when they are out there talking to folks, they can hand them the brochure that tells them what they need to do to protect our water quality. And the two on the right are examples of recently we've received calls from other departments and divisions for issues that they encounter out in the field. And so the Streets Division asked us for something about yard debris being left in the street. And our Water Resources Division asked us for something about pool draining into the street. So we are happy to put those together and share them with the other folks and have them help us get the message out, since they're much larger divisions and they're out in the field all the time. Our media outreach programs, we work with City TV usually every 2 years to produce new television ads in English and Spanish, which air on Cox Media stations, Univision, KUIT, KSBY, and of course City TV. We also work with them on their Inside Santa Barbara program, and that airs every other month, and we will produce a 4 to 5 minute news segment about our projects and programs to air. And I wanted to share with you our most recent set of PSAs, 2 sets of PSAs. This first set was produced in 2012 and has been running for a couple years.
Cut! Just ignore the trash. Keep rolling. Right away. Action!
Have you come to finish me off?
No, we're on the same team now.
Don't let litter ruin your scene.
Cut! Get the bag off the bin. Let's do it again. Right away. Action!
Everybody get out of the water!
Keep rolling.
Get out! Get out of the water!
Cut!
Don't let litter ruin your scene.
Cut! Just ignore the litter. Keep the passion. Right now. Action!
never knew it could be like this.
Cuts, cuts, cuts.
I can't work like this.
Don't let litter ruin your scene.
Okay, so those have been running for a couple years, and then this summer we just produced a new series of ads. So these ones have started running, and I will show you those as well.
That's it. Show that weed who's boss.
You know you could just pull it.
But it's so much easier to spray it with poison and kill it.
But the poison will run into our storm drains, creeks, and ocean. Do you want to swim in that? Swim in that? Swim in that?
Remember, the ocean begins on your street.
Come on, man. You know that storm drain leads straight into our creeks and ocean. It's only a little. Just dump it. It only takes a little to pollute the water. Besides, you want to swim in that? Swim in that? Swim in that?
Remember, the ocean begins on your street.
Oh my god, I love this song. Let's go.
Go ahead, toss it. It only takes a second to put it out and throw it in the trash. It's just one little cigarette butt. What's the big deal? They'll eventually end up in the storm drain, which leads right to our creeks and oceans. You want to swim in that? Swim in that? Swim in that?
Remember, the ocean begins on your street.
No way you're gonna pick that up. It's easy to bag it up and toss it in the trash. Come on, it's natural. It's basically fertilizer. If you consider bacteria-laden feces fertilizer that'll wash into the storm drains and flow into our creeks and oceans. You want to swim in that? Swim in that? Swim in that?
Remember, the ocean begins on your street.
Moving on with our media outreach, we also do English and Spanish radio advertising on several Rincon broadcasting stations. And recently we've started running some ads on KJEE. We did KDB for several years, and you might know that they changed their format recently, and so now they don't sell advertising. But it's a great opportunity to reach a different audience, so we are trying out KJEE now. We run our print ads in the Independent, Food and Home, SB Latino, and the water billing insert. This is an example of an ad we put in there, and that is every other month, a newsletter that goes out in the city water bill, and that is to over 25,000 city water customers. So it's great to be able to get information into that. We also put ads in our Parks and Recreation Activity Guide that goes out twice a year, and we run bus ads on our local MTD buses. And I wanted to show you just a couple examples of recent bus ads. The top one is from last summer, and the bottom one is from just this past summer. And these are the exterior bus ads that run during the summer months, but we also have bilingual ads on the interior of the full fleet of buses all year long. The city just last year completed a complete overhaul of the city's website, so this is what our new webpage looks like. And we have a pollution reporting function that we respond to, similar to our enforcement hotline, but folks can send in their report online. If they have photos or videos, they can upload them. So that's been a great redesign. It looks much better than the old website. Our internet outreach also includes our Creeks Division e-news, which goes out to over 600 subscribers. And we continue to work on growing our social media presence on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. This is an example of our ad that we ran on KEYT earlier this year. And this is an expandable ad. Let's see, I think I set it up so I can show you. There it is. So if you're on the KEYT webpage, it starts playing without audio. But if you roll your mouse over, it expands and gives you several ways to interact with the Creeks Division. So like us on Facebook, visit our webpage, sign up for the newsletter. So those have been pretty successful. I think that we got over 10,000 impressions a day. So that's just people seeing it, not necessarily interacting with it. I don't have those numbers handy for how many people actually clicked on it or came from that to our webpage, but I can get that for sure. We have also done ads on KPMR, that's Univision's webpage, and this is one about our clean water business programs. Speaking of our business programs, for our project and program outreach, we have another rat card that we take to events that just has really basic, quick information about the program. We send out postcards to our targeted business sectors, and we also worked with City TV earlier this year to develop some short videos about the programs and what they entail, what they have to do to get certified, and then the benefits of being certified. And those are all available on our YouTube page and on our website. Some other programs that we have ongoing. Here's another example of something we put in the water bill insert, an article about our enforcement program. We're trying to get the number added to the community some more just to get people more aware of the program. And then just a couple weeks ago, we got some magnets to put on our trucks so that when we are out in the field, people can see our number, hopefully remember our website. And also at the end of 2012, we purchased new storm drain markers. For several years, we have been working with these plastic ones that this one is actually in pretty decent shape compared to many of them. They get kind of burned by the sun and pollutants stick to them and they become totally illegible. So we went with some new metal markers and we've been working with volunteers to install them throughout the city. So for our capital projects, along with coming to our committee, of course, and holding community meetings as the project is being developed, once the project is completed, we will hold ribbon cutting ceremonies. We will install interpretive signage. Here's one that just went into Oak Park earlier this year. And another fun thing that we've done is we've purchased a couple of time-lapse cameras that we can put out at construction sites. A project that we are getting ready to work on is our community-based social marketing program. And we are partnering with the county and 7 other jurisdictions in the county on a pet waste campaign. The county has contracted with SGA, it's Stephen Groner Associates. They're based out of LA and they are kind of the firm that does CBSM locally. And we just had a conference call today. We will be implementing the project in February through May and we'll have results in June. And so most of our outreach, of course, we want people to change their behaviors, but it's really education and awareness. But CBSM is more about behavior change and measuring that behavior change. So once we see if this has been effective, then we can roll it out to the entire community. We're going to target it at a problem location, and for the city of Santa Barbara, that's going to be Arroyo Burro Beach. So we're excited to get started on that. And that's all I have for you tonight.
So impressive. Really is.
Could keep talking for a while.
Yeah, but you don't have to when you have fabulous videos to show us. Are any of the videos in Spanish?
Yes, all of them.
Okay. Nice. Any questions?
No, I just want to commend you. I think you've done a fabulous program. It seems like it's really expanding from past years, so I commend you. You're on the right track. For pollution, I just have to say again that the banning the bags has made a huge difference. I walk the beach every morning, used to find 2 to 3 bags a day. Now I find maybe 3 or 4 a week.
That's great.
It's a huge reduction, significant reduction. So that we know that taking care of it at the source can also help.
Definitely. Thank you.
No?
I'll just say, as a former nature camp camper and junior counselor, it's great that you guys are working with them. And I'll say to the public at large, the Land Shark Tour is excellent. I totally recommend you try and get on the list as early as possible next year.
Great.
So
thank you for the presentation, Liz.
Thanks.
When is Creek Week next year?
Oh, I don't have the specific date. It's the third Saturday is when it starts, the third Saturday of September. It's also Coastal Cleanup Day.
Okay.
So we tie in with that.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have the Mid-Arroyo Borough Restoration Project. We have George Johnson, the Creek's supervisor, to talk to us about Arroyo Borough.
Welcome.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to talk about the mid. Oh, no, it isn't. Okay. This is the channelized portion of the creek right here. It starts up at the Hope Avenue Bridge, goes down to here, and then it goes under Highway 101 and Calle Real right here. This is the car dealership here, La Cumbre Plaza, and a vacant parcel. And this is Hope Avenue again, running up there. So to give you a little background on it, Arroyo Borough was first channelized in 1966, and it was done as part of the La Cumbre Plaza development. Then in the early 1960s, actually before that, the culvert under Highway 101 was constructed. That was to expand the highway at that point. And the Hope Avenue Bridge was built quite a bit later in the mid-1980s, and that was part of the development of the car dealership and extending Hope Avenue. The concrete line section is 1,050 feet long. The Hope Avenue Bridge is 300 plus feet long, and then Highway 101 Bridge is 400 plus feet long. So it makes for a pretty long channelized portion of creek there. The part that we're focusing on, the project area, is this concrete lined 1,050 foot section. Yeah, that's the open section that you actually see. The others are buried under the bridge and they're basically culverts. And a little bit more background is the concrete channel was first identified for restoration back in 2000. Then the general plan, 2012, got updated, and they identified that, City Council identified that as a priority restoration project. It's included in the Creeks Division's 6-year capital program. And so in this summer, we decided to hire Questa Engineering to do a feasibility study to determine whether or not this could be a feasible restoration project. So project purpose, like most of our projects, we like to improve water quality, wildlife habitat. This could help with groundwater recharge and the aesthetics of the area, obviously, and it would remove all the concrete is what we're looking at, is trying to determine whether that's feasible or not. And so here's feasibility report received, I think, last week or just the beginning of November, end of October. And this was done by Questa Engineering. They did a bunch of modeling. They looked at the flooding risks and looked at the possibility of widening the creek channel and flood walls and erosion. And the basic summary of the feasibility report is that they did find it would be feasible to remove the concrete and put in a natural channel with vegetation on the banks, but it would require the construction of flood walls. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And just so you know, we wanted to try to look at the constraints, assuming that it would fit within the existing channel and a trail easement that's at the top of the bank. The trail easement is approximately 15 feet wide. And so the conceptual design plans that you'll see, 2 of them fit within it, 1 doesn't. But we were looking to see, is it feasible to remove this concrete, and what will it do to flooding, and what will it what will the consequences be, and will it fit within that area? And so it does, and we can't remove all 1,050 feet of the concrete. We have to leave a little bit on each end, just for stability reasons at the entrance and exits of the culverts. And so we would be able to remove 900 feet of the concrete, approximately 900 feet. So here's the conceptual design plans. They're probably a little hard to see, but we'll go over option 1. This is the most basic option. This includes a 15-foot wide channel at the bottom, and then 1.5 to 1 slopes on each side. This is the right creek bank, and that's the La Cumbre Plaza side, and this is the car dealership, or the eastern side. you can see that here's the slope, and at the top is a fence right here, and that's the existing fence at the car dealership, and then there's room for an 8-foot path, and then a 1.5 one to slope, and a 15-foot wide channel at the bottom. So again, that fits within those constraints of that trail easement. If we didn't have, if the top of bank had been over here, then we wouldn't have had room for a trail, for instance. But we do have room in this case. So the option 2 is, it looks pretty similar, but we have a narrower channel at the bottom. It's only 10 feet wide, and then we've got at the toe we have rock riprap that's placed pretty vertical, and that allows us to reduce the slope here closer to 2-to-1 on the bank. It helps preserve some of the existing oak trees, and we still have the 8-foot trail at the top. The last option is we just wanted to look and see what would be the best option in terms of shape for the creek, and that would be a 2-to-1 slope. It's not quite as steep. It's easier to revegetate a slope like that, and the steeper the slope, there's always a little more risk for erosion. So 2-to-1 is just a little more stable than 1.5 to 1. But both of them are stable. It's just this is easier to revegetate. And then this would be the 15-foot wide bottom creek channel. We looked at the creek channels both up and downstream of the project area, and they range anywhere from 11 to 15 feet. But the wider the creek channel, it just gives us a little more wetland habitat. It's just kind of preferred over the other options. So this option, we just wanted to see, well, what could we do if we made a 15-foot wide channel and a 2-to-1 slope? And what happens is we eat up all of that easement area, and there's not really room for a trail within that existing easement. So it's totally doable, but we're outside that easement area, and that was one of the constraints that we're confined to at this point. Anyway, we think that when we develop future plans, we'll probably do a combination of these. It won't be uniform all the way down the 900 feet. And we probably wouldn't be able to do the third option, but it's there just to show what can be done. Yes?
I think there's a fair amount of vegetation on the Lacumba side, some
Yes.
mature trees. Are you leaving that entirely
Sorry,
alone?
I didn't mention that. This side of the bank stays the same for all three options, and there is a significant amount of coastal live oaks or coastal. It's basically almost a woodland at that point there, and those trees are probably 40 years old. They probably resprouted after or were planted after the Lacumba Plaza was constructed, and those would stay in place. The only thing that would change on that is the bottom here, if you look there, and that's where the concrete is. So we just make that slope not quite as steep. The concrete's about 1-to-1 right now, and we reduce the slope to 1.5-to-1 in that location and then revegetate it. And the flood walls I talked about, I'll show on the next paragraph, they would all be only on the auto dealership side. They would not, there was no requirement for flood walls on the Lacumba side. You can see how much higher it is, so there's no risk of flooding there. So here's a plan view of the flood walls. And the flood walls were required because when you take the concrete channel out, it reduces, it's not as smooth, so that increases the amount of, it makes it rougher, so that slows the water down. And when the water slows down, it rises in elevation during flood events. And so we had the consultant model the 100-year flood event. Currently in the 100-year flood event, the water goes over the auto dealership and floods kind of in this section. When we took the concrete out and put in vegetation on the channel and modeled that, what happened is it raised that surface flood elevation anywhere from 1 foot to 2 feet. So that means it increases the flooding risk there, and we don't want to do a project that increases any flooding risk, and hence that's why we had to include the construction of a flood wall. We looked at widening the channel a little bit more, just to increase capacity, just digging it out more, but that didn't work. It didn't improve flood conditions. So that's why the only available option was this flood wall. And the flood wall is 4 to 6 feet high, and the reason the flood elevations only go 1 to 2 feet above the existing condition, but you have to build flood walls with 3 feet of freeboard. In other words, 3 feet of extra capacity above whatever flood elevation is predicted by the models. So if it's 2 feet, that'd be up to 5 to 6 feet, and if it's 1 foot, it'd be around 4 feet. So that's why the flood walls have to be. And the elevation does change along here. It's obviously higher here. It's a little higher on this parcel than it is down there. So that's the flood wall will be shorter at the upper end and a little taller down towards the car dealership. At the very end is what we call the weir, and that's where the flood wall actually lowers, and that's where we allow on purpose the water to spill over at that location. So that means instead of having flooding through this whole area, we would just limit the flooding to here. Same amount of water would go over it, but it's just in a smaller area. That flooding keeps going over Calle Real and then actually over across the freeway, and that's the 100-year event. It's a very, very big event, a lot of water. I don't even think this flooded in 95, but I can't remember. I didn't get any information on that. So anyway, that's the flood wall, and it is right along the edge of that trail easement, and then the trail would be on the creek side of that wall. This is just a picture of the concrete channel right now, and then construction estimates. It looks like it'd be approximately $2 million to remove the concrete channel. Those are the preliminary cost estimates based on the conceptual designs. And we do, in terms of funding, we have in the fiscal 2016 budget, we have $150,000 for design and permitting. We do anticipate $2 million will be available by 2021. That's what we have budgeted in our capital program right now. But that would include getting about $800,000 in grant funding. The next steps are we're here to ask the committee to recommend moving forward with the project, and if you guys do recommend that, then we would issue a request for proposals to get preliminary and final design plans completed for the project. And I think that's it for my presentation. I'm available for any questions. This picture is downstream, actually, of the Highway 101, and it's just the culverts there. I wanted to throw in some different pictures, so I put that in there.
Thank you, George. You might have said this, I missed it. So what's upstream of the project?
Hope Avenue Bridge, and that's the 300-plus foot long bridge. And then you get to the location where Arroyo Burro and San Roque Creek split, right behind the YMCA and Whole Foods. Whole Foods is kind of built right on the little spit, basically, between the two creeks where they split. And then you get to State Street after that.
So is there any... Oh, excuse me.
If you guys have questions, you can do questions and then you can do comments.
Oh, okay. Great. Sure. Let's do questions, and then we'll have Mr. Frickman come up with his public comment.
Sorry.
Okay.
Is there any further update on the building on that vacant lot at this point?
I'll let you answer that, Cameron.
There is an application for a development project on the vacant lot. It's a 90-unit senior affordable housing project. And I think the committee is aware of that. We went on a site visit out to the site, and we heard about that project there, and the project went for a conceptual review to the Planning Commission, but there hasn't been any additional
as far as building placement or anything?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Will the development of that lot potentially impact this project?
The Creeks Division has recommended a 50-foot setback for any development, any future development on that parcel, and for that matter on many of the parcels throughout the city because of the impacts to water quality and wildlife habitat, basically the creek function. And so if there were a development project that were approved closer than that from the top of bank, it would probably preclude the removal of the concrete from this reach.
Definitely. George, has staff talked to Caltrans at all about the culvert there? I noticed in the feasibility study, the consultant said that a larger culvert that was built for a 100-year flood event would be able to give this restoration project a little more breathing room, I guess, in terms of the slope and everything. So it seems like that would be something that would be really beneficial both to this project and to the neighboring community in terms of, because I don't know if we saw the flood map, but it's pretty dramatic, honestly.
No, I do have that. I can show you that if you want in this next slide. I didn't include it as part of my presentation, but you can see here that red line is where the existing flooding would occur. Now, it's not very deep. You just got to remember that. It's probably only a foot or so deep that goes through that car dealership, but it does inundate that whole area. And then you can see this is the path. It goes across that parking lot, across Kyrell, and then eventually across the bridge into a neighborhood on the other side of the creek. So there is some flooding risk. That is a 100-year event, so it's not very frequent, but
that's the existing.
Yeah, that's the existing. That's not with the project. With the project, it would look pretty similar. It's just you'd be limiting this to here. I mean, it would come out probably across here in this way. And then if you look at this old one, it wouldn't flood any of this area probably because the wall would be here along this, and it would just focus the flooding to that downstream corner of the parking lot and end of the building there. So anyway, back to your question about Caltrans. We did not talk to Caltrans yet about it. It's pretty early in the development of the project. This culvert right here is the one we're talking about that would need to be replaced. It's 400 plus feet long. That's a very, very expensive project, and I'm not an expert on culvert, whether it's still good or whether it's about to fail or anything like that, but it doesn't appear to be in terrible shape when you walk through it. So I don't think Caltrans would be in any hurry to replace it, just because it does pose some flooding risk, but it is not very frequent, and it would be extremely expensive to expand that. They might even have to build a bridge, which, I don't know what that would cost. I wouldn't even want to try to guess, but tens of millions of dollars.
Thank you. And just another question. What would the timeline be on the design study, the follow-up design study? What are
Well,
what
we
are your
want to
thoughts?
try to get the preliminary design done over the next year. We have some other restoration projects that we're also doing at the same time, and just due to staffing limitations, we can't move all the projects forward at as fast as we'd like to. So there are some others that are already ahead, kind of in the queue, and we'll be focusing more attention on those. But we would hope to try to do the preliminary design in the next year.
I would just add that last month we talked about the capital improvement program, and we have proposed funding for this project. And so starting July 1st, that funding would become available if it were approved, and we would be able to contract out our next phase of design then.
Just to make sure I understand. So any follow-up design work wouldn't start till July at the earliest?
Unless we had, if we had direction from the committee and from City Council to move forward sooner, we could do that. We just need to appropriate the funds to do that.
I'm a little confused. Okay, just bear with me for a second. So this project probably wouldn't go ahead because we wouldn't remove the concrete if the building that might be built there doesn't set back 50 feet from top of what do you call it, ridge. And so it seems like we can't move it forward anyway, or shouldn't spend any more money on design until we know what that decision's going to be? Question mark.
Right. I think those things are related to some degree, and the part of the issue involves the flooding and the recommendation coming from the county flood control district as well as our own recommendation for a creek restoration. So right now the recommendation from the county flood control, and it's included in our city's general plan, the language from that is a minimum of 50 feet from a natural bank creek. And the county flood control will go with a smaller setback if there's hard bank protection like there exists now. So if we were removing that, based on the information we have right now, it doesn't seem like it would be a wise decision to remove the concrete and naturalize the creek in this location if there's structures close by. Right now, in this reach of creek, the closest structure is over 75 feet from the closest building is over 75 feet from the top of bank. So at 50 feet, you would be half again as close to the creek, and it probably is pushing it for how close you would want to be. So those things are related and would be related to our decision making going forward. That's why at this point, I'm not sure there's a huge rush to go out and do the design work. As we talked about with our capital program, we put the funding in to start in July. That will give us a sense of what's happening with that property. And then the design also, as George mentioned, the design all works within the constraints of existing easements across all of those properties. So it doesn't affect the developability per se, but obviously in any future development or redevelopment of those properties, we'd be looking to expand the setbacks along the top of bank on the creek for the water quality and riparian habitat purposes.
So you think the decision on the building will be made before the July timeframe?
Well, the question was about whether whether a decision about the development on the vacant parcel adjacent to the project site would be a decision would be made on that before July, and the answer is I don't know. That depends on the applicant and the project moving through the land development process. What I do know is if that funding is available, then we have the ability to make the decision based on what's there and what the desire is of the city council moving forward with the project.
That project that we're talking about is would be on the east bank?
Right. The proposed development project is on what is now a vacant parcel on the east bank. Yes.
And so the flood wall would be on that side.
See where the cursor is? Yeah, and the flood wall is on this side, the auto dealership side, and on that vacant parcel side.
From the flood wall?
The setback would be measured from the top of bank.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I wanted to say about the flood wall and the height of the flood wall is that new developments are required to lift themselves up out of the floodplain. So they do that in a number of ways. One of those ways is to bring in soil to a site like this. My understanding is that on this site, they would have to bring in some fill material to raise up the elevation to get themselves out of the 100-year floodplain. And I think the elevation that they had to bring this up to was 173 or 174 feet. The top of the flood wall elevation would be 176 feet. So along that vacant parcel, with any development that would be approved there would require them to bring that elevation up, so that wall would be 2 to 3 feet tall, not 4 to 6 feet tall. Down at the auto dealership, I think the existing elevation is 170 feet, which is why it floods. And so to bring that up to 176, you'd have a 6-foot wall there. So that's why we have the variation in the potential wall height.
And how far from the top of bank would the flood wall be approximately?
It's about, according to the plans, concept plans, it's 8 feet because the trail is 8 feet wide, and the top of bank would be right at the edge of the trail. Then you'd have an 8-foot trail, and then you'd have the wall and the fence, whatever.
It's related to the geometry of that eastern bank and the slope, and the and if there was a rock toe or a vertical toe that was built on that side, you could change the location of the top of bank that way. But generally speaking, we're looking at an 8-foot wide trail space there.
Would you give us a little perspective by reminding us how many other opportunities there are in the city to remove concrete channelization like this and do some naturalization of the creeks?
No, there's only one I can think of off the top of my. Well, there's two. There's one at the downstream end of Mission Creek next to the railroad. And you guys may have looked at that as part of the Mission Lagoon Restoration Project. And with that, the walls couldn't be removed because those are historic sandstone walls. You would just be able to change the bed in that location. And the other one is another one you guys might be familiar with on Las Positas Creek. There's a concrete channel that I think you guys, there was a site visit to, and you should know a little about. And that would be removing, and that's 1,600 feet long or 1,500 feet of concrete channel. So that's the other location that I know of where we could remove a concrete channel of kind of similar proportions.
And then the other two locations. One, there are two others. One is Arroyo Honda, which is sort of just the back above City College, and that's not really a concrete channel as much as an asphalt. Asphalt's been poured into that creek over time, and then the other one that comes to mind is Mission Creek, the Caltrans channels, which is would be very, very challenging because of the size of those concrete facilities and the length. We have that section of Mission Creek's about 1.1 miles of concrete, but there aren't many. There are a handful, and all of them, essentially all of them, were identified in the general plan update as priority implementation projects. So it specifically calls out this reach of Arroyo Burro, the Las Positas Creek concrete channel, the Arroyo Honda asphalt, and then the only one that's more vague is it says segments of Mission Creek. Priority areas include segments of Mission Creek, which are that would be consistent with sound flood control practices. So those segments, I think, are referring to the Caltrans channel and then the old sandstone channel down by the railroad station that George mentioned.
I'll just mention it would be way more expensive to remove that Caltrans channel than this one. I mean, we were looking at $75 million or something as a ballpark estimate on trying to remove those, and it's probably more than that, just because of the flooding issues and the requirement to buy property adjacent to it, and just it's very complicated. If anything were to be done, it would probably be the lower end where there's a wetted channel upstream of Carrillo. Our little ways from Carrillo, it's dry most of the year, so that doesn't have as much value as a creek that has water in it year round, and that lower section does. So,
would any of those other? Thank you for asking that question. That was really great. Do any of those other channelized creek segments offer opportunities like you had and took such great advantage of at Oak Park, where the people can enjoy the creek? It's more open. There's a handful of people, as I understand it, who walk that passage, that footpath, basically behind the car dealership, but it's not an active place. I was just wondering, looking at opportunities, even if they might be more expensive, is there anything that the citizens of Santa Barbara would get additional benefit from enjoying that effort?
Well, part of is we're looking at all of these projects that I just mentioned that were included in the general plan are all part of the Creeks Division's capital improvement program, and they're all at different stages. So the Las Positas Creek restoration with the removal of that concrete channel also includes the improvement of a multi-purpose path. So we had public comment earlier to look at adding bikeways. What we're looking at right now is a bikeway and also a walkway along the creek there. And then the trail improvements would be part of this project as well. So yes, there's an existing trail that goes behind the car dealership there. That's part of the same trail easement that runs along the vacant parcel at the top of the creek bank. And so doing a trail improvement along that whole reach of the creek would be part of this project.
There is some talk of trying to connect that to State Street further up along the creek so that you could have a path that would go from State Street all the way down to Kyriel, about behind some of those buildings there along the creek. But the other Caltrans channel, unless we purchased property next to it, additional private property, then there's not really room to put a trail there if we were to remove the concrete.
More questions, or shall we call up Mr. Frickman? Okay, Mr. Frickman, we would love to hear your comment on this project. Welcome.
I would be happy to comment. I'm with Urban Creeks Council. The light's on, but it hasn't been very loud the whole evening. We, as you might expect, support this project and wish there could be more like this throughout the Santa Barbara Goleta area. We've been following the low-cost housing project, and we are lobbying that be scaled back so that they wouldn't have to go into the 50 feet. And I would like to ask the committee to give your wholehearted support to the Creeks Division plan so that could be a bit of information for the commission and the other powers that be to consider when they're trying to make the decisions on that. There's been 100 years of people developing along creeks and concreting them. It's really effective at getting the water out, but it's ruined the environment. And little plans like this, one step at a time, I think in the next 100 years we can get our creeks back. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Any other discussion? We have further public comment. Is that allowed? Okay. Okay, great. Mr. Goolsby, come on up. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
It's a lousy name. I think the creeks are actually one of the primary, most major natural assets of the city, which is true most places. And that's where people built. Actually, some of the first homes are built along the creeks. And I remember when people used to shove their horse manure from their stables into the creeks. In fact, this division here for the city is a pretty new city for us to, as a city, to acknowledge creeks as being something really great. And we did have floods. I've walked through floods in the side of the west side of town near the hospital and that sort of thing. That's floods. He's mentioned a 100-year event, but I think it happened twice in my life. I'll be 90. I'm suffering from dementia. I'll be 79 in a couple months. Anyway, this is going to sound really difficult, but I was thinking it would really be great for us to declare eminent domain for along the areas of the creeks where the first houses were built. So we can widen the area of the creek so people can actually walk along them. Like these paths, I think would be wonderful assets to the creeks. I took my kids, including myself, when I had any free time, hiking up the creeks was the thing to do, up in the mountains and that sort of thing. It would be nice to be able to do that right here within the city as well, and to bring back that natural aspect within the city. And I know the idea of taking out houses is maybe even sound ridiculous, but if there were a way to proceed in that way, it would be really a wonderful thing to do.
Thank you for your comment. Any other discussion? I had a clarifying question, Cameron, on something we were talking about earlier. If the committee were to recommend continued further development of the project, given the timing that we discussed in terms of the financials in July and the other pending development project, so what do you anticipate your timeline would be in taking that further development? Is the last part not clear? Okay, so what would the timeline be in continuing further project development?
I think what we have proposed is probably a good plan given what we know right now, and that is we've proposed additional funding to be part of our FY16 and 17 budget, which starts July 1st, 2015. That would go through the our standard 2-year budget process. We've proposed funding to go in for Measure B over the next 6 years. So it takes a while to work your way through not only the design process, but then also the permitting process associated with a project like this and environmental review and so forth. And so what we've set up is a course to be able to construct the project sort of at the end of that 6-year period. I'm not sure there, right now, I'm not sure that there's a reason to race ahead faster. That's not to say that something couldn't change or we get different information that makes that more of a priority, and then that's a matter of going to City Council and having them appropriate funds and then going out to bid for the design work and so forth. So so I think the schedule that we have right now is probably a good one.
Other than a recommendation from the committee to continue moving forward, is there something else we can do as that other project moves along in terms of helping maintain that setback so that this can happen?
Well, in terms of, the jurisdiction of this committee is really to focus on the creek and the creek resources and water quality and Measure B funds and so forth. And I think as far as any development project up in that on that property, the setback from the creek is an important part of protecting the creek resources and water quality. I mean, there have been numerous studies done on necessary setbacks for protecting ecological function of small streams. And so if we're interested in improving water quality in the creeks and at the beaches in Santa Barbara, the science points to having a larger setback than what we've provided in the past. And so what we're looking at in this case is we've made a recommendation of a minimum of 50-foot setback. I think those kinds of things, creek setbacks in order to protect those kinds of resources are within the committee's purview. As to specific aspects of a development project, is probably getting too far into a land use arena. So, as part of your recommendation, I think if you want to include setback recommendations, that's okay. I think that could go to whatever development project is ultimately proposed for that property. And as I said, if a building is built too close to the creek, it probably will preclude a restoration of this reach of Arroyo Burro into the future.
Any other discussion?
Well, if we're definitely on discussion at this point instead of questions, I'll just say that very simply, this stretch of creek was identified in the general plan. As we just heard, one of the few stretches that we can restore in the city. And I think it behooves us to do everything we can to restore this. And anything that would preclude us from doing that, I think we should try and avoid. And we should shoot for a setback that will make this project possible. As we've already seen, it's already constrained to a certain extent, which is why we need the flood wall. And we shouldn't put any additional constraints on this on top of that. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, if there's no further discussion, do we have a recommendation?
I recommend we encourage the Creeks Committee to continue with this project. Division staff, please. Yeah, we'll get out there with our jackhammer this weekend.
Can we add on to that recommendation our strong opinion on a 50-foot setback for any development that happens on that property?
We can. Any further discussion?
I second.
Okay, we have a second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None abstain? Okay, that's our recommendation. And I don't see any other business, but thank you, George, for your presentation. So do we have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion.
Second.
Okay, great.
Sorry.
All in
I had to get my
favor?
hand to the microphone.
All in favor? Aye. Aye. Okay. None opposed, none abstained. We're adjourned.